Well, hi, David. Hi, everybody. So, we do start with breaking news because it's literally just hit us in the last 5 minutes. So I'm going to be reading this, I'm afraid. Difficult to make a huge amount of sense out of it. But we are hearing that 2 Ukrainian drones, that is according to the Kremlin. So just let me get to the end and then we'll pull it apart. 2 Ukrainian drones tried to attack Vladimir Putin's residence in the Kremlin late last night. That's according to the Russian presidential press office. They say neither the president nor his schedule was in any way affected by the attack. The report just in the last couple of minutes. Kremlin's press office described the incident as a planned terrorist attack and an assassination attempt and pledged to retaliate. Russia reserves, this is what they're saying, Russia reserves the right to retaliate when and where it deems necessary. And shortly before the statement, so just a few minutes ago, a public neighbourhood group on Telegram published 2 videos showing a plume of white smoke rising over the Kremlin last night. Okay, end of reading the news as it's breaking. So this is fresh to us as it is to you. So they're saying 2 drones. Well, saying drones. They're saying 2 drones. They're saying 2 Ukrainian drones. We can't verify any of that at the moment, but it does look as if something's happened. I mean, I'm about to talk about some other bits and pieces that have gone bang in Russia in the last 24 hours. There does seem to be something going on here. So let me carry on, and then we'll sort of wrap all this up in some analysis, if I may. So we've also got so another Russian freight train was derailed by an explosion in the Bryansk region. So Bryansk is to the north and sort of northeast of Ukraine. It borders Ukraine and Belarus. So this was the second incident to occur in recent days after, you remember we spoke yesterday, another train was derailed by a bomb in the same area on Monday, the same region of Russia, Bryansk region. I don't know exactly where this one today was, but it's on the north of Sumy, northeast of Chernihiv, northish, northwest of Kharkiv, that area. So Bryansk governor said an unidentified explosive device went off near the Snetskaya railway station, no casualties. As a result of the incident, a locomotive and several wagons of freight train were derailed. No mention of who was responsible. But as I say, several incidents occurred in Russia and Crimea over the past few days. So we had the other rail line explosion yesterday. And over the weekend, there were power lines blown up near St. Petersburg. And now you've got this alleged drone attack in the Kremlin. So, I mean, it's a huge country. And we don't know if any. So I'm not suggesting they are connected. But, I mean, these are very odd incidents. OK, let me now just carry on for a moment. So also overnight, a fuel depot has gone up in smoke in the Russian village of Volna. So this is very close to the Kerch Bridge linking to Ukraine, Crimea. The governor of Krasnodar Krai, so that's the region of Russia immediately east of Crimea. He spoke on Telegram, well, he posted on Telegram this morning. A tank with petroleum products caught fire in Volna village of Temursky district. So that district is this is me speaking now. That's the bit of Russia sticking out at Crimea, sort of pointing at Crimea. Stop me if I'm getting too technical and geographic, but the bit of Russia that sticks out and points at Crimea, from which the Kerch Bridge leaves Russian territory, that's where we're talking about. And the village of Volna is one of the last sort of built up areas before the Kerch Bridge starts. So that's where this thing has gone bang. So the governor carried on. He said the fire has been assigned the highest level of severity. Sounds pretty bad. And Russian state news agency TASS are saying the fire was caused by the fall of a drone. I guess they mean a drone that's fallen out of the sky. So, right, there's a lot of things going on here. Another Russian freight train blown up in Bryansk. Fuel depot fire. Something happening potentially in the Kremlin on the back of, over the weekend, power lines destroyed near St. Petersburg. So, yeah, we don't know, do we? It's difficult to say if this is in any way orchestrated, if there's some kind of Ukrainian attack, Ukrainian-sponsored attack. We just don't know. We are bringing you the news. Analysis will have to follow, I'm afraid. But carrying on, if I may. So more airstrikes. So last night, Russia's launched another round of airstrikes across the country, including the capital. So in last night's attack, an administrative building in the Dnipro region was hit. So this is sort of centre east of the country on the river. The fire it hit an administrative building. No casualties reported. Fire was out by this morning, according to the regional governor. And in Kyiv, Ukraine's Air Force Command said that so the air defence systems that were activated over Kyiv hit everything that was fired at them, and in total 21 of 26 Shahed 136, so these Iranian-made drones that we talk about a lot, 21 of 26 were destroyed. All of those, they didn't put a figure on the number that went aimed at Kyiv, but all of those aimed at the capital were destroyed. So Air Force Command said all enemy targets were identified and shot down in the airspace around the capital. And this is the third round of night attacks in 6 days, Russian air attacks in 6 days. Today's British Defence Intelligence report talks about a possible shift from Russia away from attacking civilian infrastructure and the power networks and what have you, towards trying to hit Ukraine's military, industrial and logistic nodes and infrastructure more broadly. I don't know how accurate that is based on the attacks last night. Okay, an administrative building in Dnipro, that could be some massive logistic headquarters, or it just could be a building with civilians nearby. So I'm not sure about that UK Defence Intelligence report. But as I said before, and this was what we got from Western officials, Russia is still in the habit of getting all the new shiny stuff in and then just splurging it straight away. I mean, we are told that the Donbass and Bakhmut in particular is the priority at the moment. They are throwing thousands of men at it, and yet they seem to get these new missiles and the new drones in and then splurge them in fairly pointless air attacks across the country that are just causing misery to civilians. They are not in any way denting the morale, or rather to the extent that the civilians are saying to their military and political leadership, we've had enough. It's just not happening. The winter offensive has failed. That's what the White House said yesterday. So I don't know why Russia are doing it, because I'm still potentially looking at this through the lens of a former professional military officer, very small p, because this is not how you do war. If you've got a priority, then you work to that priority and you integrate your air and missile forces to that priority. And if you're saying that the Donbass and Bakhmut is your priority, then why are you firing missiles around the place that are getting shot down in Kyiv and hitting a building in hundreds of miles away in Dnipro? It just doesn't make sense. And it just comes back to that meme that you would have seen going around social media of the Ukrainian guy in the trench saying, "We are lucky they are so king stupid." I think it absolutely underlines that. One last point before I pause. The governor of Kherson region has said that there's going to be a 58-hour curfew. I don't know if that's 58 or 48. It's reported as 58-hour curfew from Friday evening. Residents are being ordered to evacuate the area last week. And that was on the back of the military administration saying that Russia has increased bombardments in the Kherson region. So we're now in the south of the country, the Kherson. So Alexander Prokudin, he said, "We've recently noticed that the enemy has ramped up bombardments on Kherson Oblast as well as the rest of Ukraine. I cannot let the people of Kherson suffer. Restrictions are necessary so that law enforcement officers can do their job and not put you in danger. The city will be closed for entry and exit. Being outside is prohibited." Interesting. I mean, that is an interesting response. We've not seen that before. Whether or not this is just adding to the whole information battle of the potential forthcoming anticipated counter-offensive, I think that's very interesting. I question. I think we're deep in the information battle. I think the counter-offensive has started. I think this is it. I think we're in the shaping operation as we discussed yesterday. You don't have to start shooting at people to be contacting the enemy. I think we are in the information war here, and I think this curfew in Kherson is part of that. As for all the other stuff, the strikes, again, I think it's fairly pointless by Russia, but speaks of they've run out of ideas. They just don't know what to do. They are doing what they can. They get the new stuff in from Iran, and then they just light the blue touch paper. There's no point to that at all. The other stuff is much more interesting, and we will track the news from the Kremlin. I'm going to be looking at that as we talk today. Hopefully, bring some more comment on that by the end. But yeah, there's a lot happening. Bits and pieces, which I think is very interesting and designed in many ways to unsettle Russia and Russian minds, fix their minds, to get them thinking in many different directions ahead of this anticipated offensive. But I'll take a pause there.
Thanks, Dom. Just to bring you some more breaking news that's coming in on our live blog right now. But the mayor of Moscow has issued a ban on all drones over the Russian capital. This is after the Kremlin claimed it had thwarted a Ukrainian drone attack. Dmitry Peskov, Vladimir Putin's spokesman, has been giving some quotes. He told the RRA Novosti news agency that Mr. Putin was actually not at the Kremlin at the time. He was in his out-of-town residence of Novo-Ogorovo. And we will come back to this. Genevieve Hall-Allen, you've joined us from the foreign desk at The Telegraph. You've been running the live blog all day today. Could you talk us through some of the big stories that you've been watching? I know we need to talk, I think, first of all, about developments in the Ukrainian grain and produce coming into the EU and coming into EU countries. What's happening there?
Hi, thanks very much, David. It's great to be on the podcast. Yes, the first piece of news that I'm going to talk about today is based on reporting by Joan Barnes, who is the Telegraph's Brussels correspondent. And yes, this is the latest update in kind of the situation with grain coming out of Ukraine. And this is that the EU has allowed 5 member states, that is Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia and Hungary, to ban imports of Ukrainian grains. This ban could cover wheat, maize, rapeseed and sunflower seed and could last until June the 5th. Now, it's a notable update. It's a notable kind of change in tack here because it represents the first major challenge really to united support from the EU bloc in terms of supporting Ukraine through this war and looking at certain nations looking towards their own domestic concerns and those winning out. I mean, this emergency blockade could cost up to £160 million or to our US listeners, $200 million to the Ukrainian economy, according to the National Bank analysis. And these 5 countries will also receive €100 million to compensate farmers who are impacted by cheap imports. Now, these countries, with the exclusion of Hungary, are particularly staunch allies of Ukraine. So this has been, quite a surprising update as it has unfolded.
Thanks, Genevieve. Can we stay in Ukraine then? President Volodymyr Zelensky is out of the country. He's made a surprise, unscheduled trip to Helsinki in Finland. What's he doing there?
Yes, so he has arrived in Finland for a one-day summit with leaders from the Nordic countries. This includes prime ministers of Sweden, Norway, Denmark and Iceland. And obviously, President Zelensky will be meeting with the Finnish president as well. In terms of what they're going to be discussing, this is in the words of the Swedish government. The theme of the summit is Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, the Nordic countries' continued support for Ukraine, Ukraine's relationship with the EU and NATO, and Ukraine's initiative for just peace. I mean, it's evident that these countries are particularly interested in and affected by the developments between Russia and Ukraine. You just have to look at Finland joining NATO last month, becoming the 31st member of the alliance, and its application prompted by the invasion because, of course, it shares a 832-mile border with Russia. And, this concern from the Nordic countries is encapsulated by the words of the Norwegian Prime Minister today, who said, "The war is a turning point for our entire continent. Here in the north, we have a more unpredictable and aggressive Russian neighbour, and it is important that we discuss together how to face this new situation." As expected, President Zelensky will be looking to allies to secure more support, financial, military and humanitarian in the continuance of this war. And also the news today that Zelensky is to visit Berlin to meet Chancellor Olaf Scholz on May the 13th. So that's kind of his movements outside of Ukraine for the next couple of weeks.
There's been an interesting article in the Washington Post looking at something Zelensky has said about the Pentagon leaks that we've been talking about for quite a few weeks now. There was some new information from Volodymyr Zelensky. What did he say?
Yes, so speaking to the newspaper The Washington Post from Kiev, President Zelensky has said that Washington did not tell him about the Pentagon leaks before the news broke. Now, this news came out in early April, and a lot of the US intelligence that was leaked onto Discord, the social media platform, was sensitive information in terms of the Ukraine war. I mean, among those documents that were leaked included US intelligence suggesting that a counter-offensive could fall, in their words, well short of Kiev's goals. And it also said, again, in quotes, that enduring Ukrainian deficiencies in training and munition supplies probably will strain progress and exacerbate casualties during the offensive. So pretty significant stuff coming out there. And yes, in an interview with the Washington Post, who first reported much of the leaked intelligence, President Zelensky said, "I did not receive information from the White House beforehand. We did not have that information. I personally did not." He said it was, and then in quotes, definitely a bad story, and described it as an unprofitable situation. Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder would neither confirm nor deny what President Zelensky had said, and told CNN that Washington remains committed to working very closely with Ukraine and our international allies to ensure that they have the security assistance they need to be able to defend their country. When Zelensky was asked whether it had strained trust between the countries, according to Washington Post reporting, the president said, "I cannot risk our state," which is a quite interesting response to that question.
Thanks very much, Genevieve. Can I ask you just to talk about one more story you've been looking at? We're going to leave Washington, go back to Russian-occupied Crimea. It's a story about the FSB, Russia's security service.
Yes, so as we heard from Dominic, the situation in Crimea has really been getting ever more tense in recent days, and we've just kind of heard today that the FSB, that's Russia's security service, has arrested 7 people who they claim were members of, and then in quotes, an agent network of Ukrainian military intelligence. The FSB accuses them of planning a series of attacks in Russian-occupied Crimea. The service said in a statement that they have broken up the activities of an agent network of Ukrainian military intelligence, planning to carry out major sabotage and terrorist attacks in Crimea. Among those, they alleged that there were plans to plot to assassinate the Russian-installed head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, who later, wrote on Telegram following this news that there is not any doubt that those who ordered the crimes are in Kiev, and then called Ukraine a terrorist state. There were, not in that Telegram message was there evidence to support that. The FSB, going back to what they said, they apparently seized explosive devices and detonators, which they say were smuggled into the country from Bulgaria via Turkey and Georgia.
Well, thank you very much, Genevieve. I'm sure we'll be coming back to this story later on, but can I welcome our guest, Frederick Hugo Lidegaard from Denmark. Frederick, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me today.
It's a pleasure. You've been working on some really interesting investigative reporting with colleagues across Scandinavia. Could you tell us a little bit about the story you've been working on? But actually, maybe before that, just set the scene for us. You've been looking at the movement of Russian ships and shipping in the North Sea.
So actually for the last year, since the full-scale invasion broke out last year, we've been investigating covert Russian operations in the Nordic countries. So this includes espionage, sabotage, what happens at the sea, disinformation, and the like. And in the last 3 weeks, we have been revealing some of these stories in our documentary Putin's Hidden War and our English-spoken podcast Cold Front. And now today we release the rest of the episodes where we have a story, an investigation into 3 Russian vessels that have been in the area of the later Nord Stream explosion sites, especially the northern ones.
Well, let's get into this story then. What did you look at and what did you find? And please feel free to go into the detail.
Yes, so we have access to intercepted radio communication from the Russian Navy that reveals how 3 Russian Navy vessels were operating near the Nord Stream explosion sites in June and September last year, and that they were operating with their AIS signal turned off, so their navigational transponder, so operating as dark vessels or ghost ships. The vessels are an unidentified Russian Navy vessel and hydrographic ship like research vessel Sibriakov from the Russian Navy as well, and the sea tug, also called the salvage tug SB-123. And the expert we have talked to says that especially the last 2 have capacity to conduct underwater operations, so have equipment in the water, launch small underwater drones, or launch other stuff into the water. And the first ship that we haven't identified visited the area of the northern explosion sites in the beginning of June and was there briefly. The second ship, the Cypriaco, visited the area 1 week later and stayed there for almost 24 hours in the area while conducting slow speed activity 3 times. So this data isn't, they don't, in the messages, the radio communication, they don't say exactly what they're doing. We only have the location, the speed and the direction. But a satellite image from the night where the Cypriaco was there in the middle of June shows that there were actually 2 ghost ships only 100 meters and a few kilometers from the later leakage sites. And they have no wake, so the radar imagery suggests that they are operating still in the water. And they both have the same lens, roughly as the Cypriaco. So we don't know if which of these ships is the Cypriaco or any one of them is. So we have no radio communications during that night. There's a 12-hour gap. And the last ship, SB-123, the Sea Tug from the Russian Navy, is really interesting because it corresponds with what we already know, but haven't been able to prove with data. So in March, T-Online, the German media, talked about 6 Russian Navy ships that, according to German intelligence sources, was in the area of the later Nord Stream explosion sites on September 22nd, just 4 days before the explosions. And now we can place one of these ships, the SB-123, via this intercepted radio communication in the area between the northern and southern explosion sites. And just last week, the Danish newspaper Information confirmed that the Danish patrol vessel Nymphen took 26 pictures of one more of these 6 ships, the SS-750, which is a Russian Navy ship with extensive underwater capabilities, including the ability to launch and support small submarines. So actually now we have data of 4 Russian Navy ships in the area before the explosions happened.
Well, it's an astonishing story, Frederick. Thank you for going into so much detail for us. Before we go on, would you just summarise for our listeners what we know, or what we think we can prove, what you think you can prove, and also what we don't know?
Yes. So the important thing about this story is that we don't conclude anything else that these vessels were here. So that's it's purely based on data in that way. We have been finding satellite imagery from their routes, radar imagery and optical images that support these routes. So we know that they were there. At least we have for example, 6 in the morning, 9 in the morning, 12 at noon, and then again 15, 18 o'clock. So we don't know what they did in between these times. We don't know what they did. We can't see it. I don't know if you have seen radar imagery, but it's more like it's very pixelated. You can't see at all what the ships are doing. So there's a lot we don't know, but what experts tell us is that it's highly suspicious and interesting that these vessels, specifically these vessels, were in the area in months and days up to, because they have underwater capabilities and some of them are known to support submarine trials.
Could you tell us a little bit about your investigative process in this story? What obstacles have you found as journalists working across Scandinavia to try and get to the bottom of this?
Yes, I think so. Normally, as an investigative reporter, if you, for example, investigate a murder, you look for someone being there on the same day as the murder has happened. But what sources tell is that very likely these explosive, no matter who did it, was placed days or even weeks or months before. So like the smoking gun that you're always looking for in a mystery, perhaps is impossible to find. So that was a really hard obstacle to have from the beginning. So we've just set out to ourselves to find all the interesting vessel activity in the area in the months leading up to. And these now 4 Russian Navy ships are, according to experts and sources, definitely interesting in that regard.
May I ask, what has the reaction been inside Scandinavia to your reporting, but also Russia? What have you heard from the Russians on this?
Yeah, so actually reached out to the Russian embassy in Copenhagen some weeks ago, but didn't get any answer. But today, the Russian Foreign Ministry has said that our story is, and I quote, a part of a Western misinformation campaign to ensure that those who ordered and perpetrated this act of international terrorism are never identified. So they deny our story.
And just quickly, what's the reaction like in the public in Scandinavia? I mean, these explosions, when they happened, I mean, they're very, very close to Denmark and Sweden and Norway.
Yeah, so actually, when the explosions happened, we were already investigating seabed warfare. There's been some cable cuts in Norway close to Svalbard, which an NRK investigation found was likely done by some Russian fishing vessels. So we were already investigating this area of seabed warfare. So we just jumped right on it. My colleague Nils jumped out in a plane to watch the leakage sites, and the same day as it happened, we actually sat in a room together. You can see it in the documentary as well, and see when the first pictures of these huge bubbles in the water form after the explosion. So of course this is a huge story in Scandinavia, but it seems like it's a huge story in all over the world, at least when it happened.
Did anything surprise you during this process? Did anything that you found surprise you as an investigative journalist looking into this?
So I guess I thought that military Russian Navy radio communication would be encrypted and impossible to access. So I was really surprised when we found this former intelligence officer from the British Navy that was able to listen in on internal radio communication from the Russian Navy. And I was really surprised by that. But together with satellite imagery and AIS data where it was possible and source it, we have been able to support and confirm this route that these data show. But yeah, I was really surprised that this was even possible the first time I heard about it.
Frederick, is there anything we haven't spoken about that you think our listeners should understand? But before we go to see if Dom has any questions.
Yeah, so I think the important thing to underline here is that this is, of course, interesting information according to our sources, no matter what. They say that this could be related to the Nord Stream explosions, but that this could also be related to something unknown. But no matter what, the way these vessels communicated and operated was suspicious in some sort, according to our sources. And one independent British naval analyst called H.I. Sutton has an interesting quote. And what he says is that if we had this information right after the explosions happened, it might have been a different media picture in the following months than what we have seen.
Dom, do you have any questions?
Yeah, hi, Frederick. Thanks so much for joining us. Just a quickie, if I may. I wonder if you could give us a quick view of the Baltic Sea, so sort of northern NATO lake, if you like now, people are calling it, with hopefully Sweden and Finland's accession to NATO. How do you see the threat from Russia there, in particular the exclave of Kaliningrad, and how is it becoming militarized? Thanks.
So these three vessels are all part of the Russian Navy, Baltic Sea Navy, and the ships leave their ports in Lomonosov, St. Petersburg, and Baltusk, Kaliningrad before they visit these areas. And as you know, the Baltic Sea has all the Baltic countries, the Scandinavian countries, and Germany, Poland, and then this small part of Russia called Kaliningrad. And that is actually pretty close to these later Nord Stream explosion sites. And just a fun fact that my family on the Danish island Bornholm will appreciate. Actually, Bornholm is so close to Russia that when Denmark was liberated after World War II, Bornholm, the Danish island, was only liberated from the Soviet Union 1 year later in 1946. So this is an area with a Cold War history, and now it seems like something is happening here again.
Thank you very much, Frederick. Can I ask you just to tell us where to find your story? You said you've launched a podcast series. Can you tell us about that? And just finally, I mean, we've gone into a lot of detail now. Would you very quickly just sum up what you found?
Yes, so should I sum up first, maybe? What we have found is 3 Russian Navy vessels that in June and September last year visited the area of especially the later northern explosion sites of the Nord Stream pipeline, and that experts believe this to be highly suspicious and interesting in relation to these Nord Stream explosions. This is not a conclusion, but this is some data that we put forward and hopefully will bring clarity. Yeah. And this story you can hear much more about in our English spoken, our first international podcast, Cold Front, with 6 episodes where we go into espionage, seabed warfare, disinformation, and even a killing attempt in Sweden. It's available everywhere, Apple, Spotify, where you listen to your podcasts.
And I will say just quickly to listeners that we will put a link to Cold Front in the show notes for today's episode. Frederick, thank you so much for joining us. It's been absolutely fascinating hearing this, and I do believe we're one of the first outlets really to get the full story from you. So thank you so much for your time. It's hugely appreciated.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Dom Nichols, can I go back to you? You've been, all the way through this podcast. Listeners might be aware that it's been rather frantic here in the studio as we're trying to discover as much as we can about these alleged attacks, these drone attacks on the Kremlin in Moscow last night. Dom Nichols, is there anything more we know?
Not really. So we just need to caution here. I would direct people, have a look at Eric Toller on Twitter. He's one of the Bellingcat researchers. I mean, he's got some, and it's elsewhere as well, but Eric has got some great footage of this supposed drone, something flying anyway, something in the sky, hitting the flag on top of the dome of the Kremlin roof. And look, we don't know what happened, but it's incontrovertible that Russia has commented about this. And Eric is making the point. He says Russia went from bragging that they'd take Kyiv in days to clarifying that Putin wasn't hurt by a Ukrainian drone attack in Moscow. So that is a legitimate comment. I would just try and put this in a bit of perspective. So just remember, back in January this year, there were reports, and they're still out there, you'll find them on social media, that Russia was putting air defense missiles on a number of buildings around Moscow. So we saw the Pantsir missile system on a Russian MOD building, one of the big 8-story buildings around in central Moscow. There was also one on the roof of an education building in about 1.5 miles outside the Kremlin, southeast of the Kremlin. Now, Russian military officials did not comment at the time about these things, but it was widely reported by Russian media that there were S-400 systems also deployed in January in Moscow around December, January. So, it does seem odd. I just caution. It seems odd that something could get through what must be a very, very layered defence of air defence systems. Something's gone all that way, but depending where it launched from, obviously. But something to get through the most highly layered air defence system in the world, arguably one of the most. Doesn't mean it works. We've seen a lot of Russian kit not working. But I just caution that that's an amazing strike if it is a Ukrainian drone that's got that far. I would also caution, just have a think about the timing. So it literally broke just before we came on here at 1300 BST, so lunchtime London. Moscow's 3 hours ahead of us. This strike happened reportedly last night. The images that you'll see are dark, Now, hey, what time's dawn in Moscow? Not entirely sure at the moment, but the reports and the imagery have just hit social media and just come out. And yet this thing was supposed to have happened, 12 hours ago, 8 hours ago? So, I don't know. So hang on. So let's with all that in mind,
just to jump in. Sorry. So sunrise in Moscow tomorrow will be at 4:40 a.m. So it was probably slightly later yesterday. If that's helpful, Dom.
Yeah, not really. So let's say 4 o'clock for cash, right? Let's say these things happen at 4 o'clock. We don't know what time, but let's say it's dark at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock in the morning, 0400 Moscow time is 0100 BST here in London, and it's now 1300-ish. So 12 hours later, worst case scenario, and yet we're only just getting news and imagery. So I don't know. I'm until proven, I'm skeptical, but let's have a think about it. if it was legit, if Ukraine did it, and this is a Ukrainian drone, there have been multiple suggestions over the recent months from Ukrainian officials, hints that they've got some long-range drone capability. And we've seen great innovation in the maritime domain. We've seen those surface drones in the maritime domain. We're still not exactly sure what happened to the Moskva. We think it was a modified Neptune or a couple of modified Neptune missiles, but we don't know. Ukraine has demonstrated amazing ability to innovate. So maybe they have got something. Why now? Possibly because over recent weeks there's been a huge inflow of air defence to Ukraine, and in particular around Kyiv. So maybe they're feeling more emboldened to do something like this. I speculate. I just come back to what were the air defence doing in Moscow to allow this thing to get through. So Russia's reaction. Now let's have a look at that. So they're going to use this as almost certainly use it as part of their domestic narrative to shore up their position. But they've got to be careful, because if they ramp up this threat, then it's going to look more and more like this special military operation is a war. Okay, that's what Eric Toller was saying. They've gone from saying, yeah, we'll be there in 72 hours, lads, to saying, don't worry, Putin wasn't killed in last night's drone strike. So they've got to be a bit careful with that. And again, if they amplify the threat from Ukraine, it brings it home, doesn't it? We're only a week away from their May the 9th victory parade. It was a sham last year, but this is a significant date for them. So do they want to be ramping up the threat from Ukraine a week before that? However, they might use it to justify striking targets in Kyiv, presidential buildings and what have you. I question, would they care anyway? Wouldn't they just go and do it? I think they would. We simply don't know. These thoughts are put out there. I would hold these in your head and then consume the news through them, and just sort of make your own mind up. We'll continue to analyse it. We'll be talking about it tomorrow and more, I'm sure. Just remain sceptical. Let's have a look at the reaction from NATO and the US and so on. A lot of chat, obviously, about would the US allow Ukraine to have weapons that can strike inside Russia. I've never really been sold on that idea myself, but perhaps the US reaction would give us some pointers here. So just let's wait to see what's happening through the day. I question the capability. I question the timing. I question the justification. But all set against that, Ukraine have shown the ability to surprise us all on the battlefield and further afield many, many times. Let's have a look for more comment and more reaction, particularly from the US.
Well, just on that, we've got an update on our blog written by our guest earlier, Genevieve Hole-Allen. Russian ultranationalists are calling for blood after last night's alleged drone attack. So this is Igor Gerkin, a separatist commander and influential military blogger, said on Wednesday it was time for Moscow to launch a devastating strike on Ukraine. Quote, Ukraine should be destroyed, he wrote in his blog. Margarita Simonyan from Russia Today TV channel has also tweeted, maybe it's time to start it in earnest, referring to the invasion of Ukraine and echoing comments made by Putin last year. So that gives us slightly more of a flavour of how some from Russia are reacting to this alleged strike on the Kremlin. Dom, before we go,
hang on a sec. But I mean, they react like that every time Putin stumbles on a step, or they do this all the time. They sort of let's go kill them all. I mean, guys, change the record. We've been hearing this for a year now. They do this. This is all they can do. I don't know how influential this military blogger community are generally. I mean, we've seen sometimes where they seem to have shifted policy, perhaps about the attacks on the civilian infrastructure. But in terms of something like this, what else are they going to do? They're already lobbing missiles around and killing civilians. I mean, if they're calling for escalation, what else can Russia do? What can they actually do? They can talk a lot, but as I said, they've not gone anywhere on the battlefield for months now. They can't knit together proper combined arms operations. They've tried attacking civilian infrastructure over the winter. That's not worked. So I mean, they're great. You say what you like, lads. I mean, yes, what you're saying is, if I was a Russian, I'd probably agree with you, because you've got to do something about this. But Russia just have demonstrated an inability. If this turns out to be a Ukrainian strike that's hit a flagpole, I mean, poor old flagpole, but it's an amazing story. If they've developed something that can get that far and get through that layered air defence, I mean, that's absolutely criminal from the Russian military hierarchy. So so let's read, digest, and then go and the comments from the Russian mill blogger community, and then go and read some more rational thought and analysis elsewhere. But yeah, we should note it and move on.
Thanks very much, Dom. Before we end, can we talk a little bit more about the anticipated, we're sort of wondering what words used to describe it, the anticipated counteroffensive. We spoke yesterday about the shaping operations, and it was very interesting to hear your views on how to conceptualise a shaping operation, what it might involve, how it involves much more than potentially some of us think. And you posed something to me earlier over tea that, should we ask the question, has the counteroffensive already started?
Yes. I mean, that's a bit like, as I said at the start here, in terms of the information war, shaping this war, I wonder if it has started. So there has been, I said counteroffensives and shaping operations can be incredibly violent. They need to be in order to make the enemy think that it's already started, or that it's a diversion, or what have you. So, just because it's a shaping operation, it's not the main event. Doesn't mean it's no less violent for that. And of course, it doesn't have to involve shooting. It can involve the information domain of which we're a part. We are talking about this anticipated counteroffensive as if it's a done deal. No one's told us that it's actually going to happen. I think it probably will, but what's to say that it doesn't? I think the best thing the worst thing that Ukraine can get out of any counteroffensive is for the international community of supporters to shatter. And that might happen if I don't think Ukraine would overpromise and underdeliver, or overpromise. Underdeliver is yet to be decided. The enemy gets a vote. But I don't think Ukraine would overpromise. Whether or not that idea is built up through comment, to which we contribute, I think that's unhealthy to dress this thing up as, take the idea of the Kharkiv offensive last year, that mad rush, 50, 60, 70 Ks east. That's the template for success. Anything less than that is a failure. That would be wrong and dangerous, because it doesn't always work like that. And I think if the more this idea is built up that only that kind of level of success counts, and anything else is, oh no, dear me, it's all going bendy, that's unhelpful completely. I think what Ukraine need to demonstrate from the counteroffensive is that they can do combined arms manoeuvre. They can get the infantry working with the tanks, the engineers, the air defence, everybody working together. That might be on a very, very, very small scale, but they've got to test it. They've been training individually on their specific systems and vehicles. Then they're working as small teams within those groupings. Then they're working as combined arms. They're meeting the opposition, saying, well, how fast does your tank go? Because my infantry carrier goes a bit faster or a bit slower, or what have you. How are we going to time the run into the attack? All that kind of stuff. And then you've got to train. And then you've actually got to get bloodied in combat. And I would suggest that you don't, with this new thing, bearing in mind there's a whole heap of capabilities here that are new to each other, let alone new to Ukrainians using it, trying to move off a former Soviet system onto NATO equipment and calibers and all the rest of it. I would suggest you don't throw that thing at a massive problem straight away and hope for an advance across the entire front in Ukraine. They are clearly not going to do that. But the more that the idea is allowed to build in the public's consciousness that is what success looks like, the more Ukraine are going to have difficulty when they turn around and say, no, fellas, we only wanted to do a 5K advance with a company group of 120 blokes, 12 tanks and some infantry. That to us is success. If the world goes, oh, boring, we wanted Kharkiv too, then that's not good. So I think we owe it to them to better understand what the capability is now and what realistically might happen. And I really would counsel, I don't think it's going to be some pell-mell dash across the eastern Ukraine. I think there'll be much smaller, tactical, maybe operational, slightly a bigger lump than tactical. But these are going to be small operations to test and then adjust and go again when they've got a better idea of how to fight with all this new stuff. So I do think as part of all that the counteroffensive, I mean, it doesn't matter when you draw a line, say it started, it hasn't started. I think we're already in it. I think they're already shaping the information narrative, and I think we have a duty here as well to set the